Daniel told the court that 22 years of my income, my labor, and my name on those mortgage payments added up to nothing. And then I put the envelope on the table. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the judge. He spoke about his father the way you speak about a man you owned, like I had been borrowing the marriage and the time was up. He said the houses had always been his father's. He said I had simply lived in them. He said the word lived the way you'd say a tenant, the way you'd say a guest who had finally overstayed. I sat in the second row in a navy dress I had ironed that morning. My hands were folded. My tea, which I'd left on the kitchen counter at home, would have been cold by then. I thought about it anyway. I think about small things when something big is happening. It keeps me from shaking. 22 years, 2 birthdays a year times 22, Christmas dinners I cooked, hospital nights I slept upright in a vinyl chair, a bathroom I tiled because the contractor we hired never came back, a roof I argued about with 3 different men until one of them finally listened to me, a mortgage I helped pay every single month from a joint account I had opened with my own social security number printed right beside his. Daniel did not know about the envelope. Nobody in that family did. If you have ever been treated like your patience meant permission, stay with me. And if this story speaks to you, subscribe to my channel for more stories like this, because quiet women are not always powerless. My name is Eleanor. I am 68 years old. I married Charles in the spring of 2002 on a Saturday with too much wind and a cake that leaned slightly to the left. I was 44, he was 51. He had a son named Daniel from his first marriage, who was 23 at the time, and already wearing his father's watch on weekends without asking. Charles and I had what people who weren't paying attention called a quiet marriage. We did not fight loud. We did not announce things. We did not post pictures. We made coffee in the same pot for 2 decades and learned each other's silences the way other couples learn each other's tempers. He read at the kitchen table in the morning. I watered the plants on the porch. We were the kind of married people who could pass a salt shaker across a room without speaking. He had 3 properties when I met him. The house we lived in on Birch Lane, a smaller house off the highway he rented out to a school teacher named Lorraine for 14 years, and a piece of land with an old duplex on it that he called the investment, even though for most of our marriage it was just a place we drove past on Sundays. The first time Daniel really looked at me, I mean looked at me the way you look at a problem, was at our wedding. I was holding a glass of champagne I had not sipped. He came over and said, "You make him happy, that's good." Then he said, "I just want you to know I'm watching out for him." He said it with a smile. The kind of smile a man uses when he wants you to remember a sentence later. I remembered it. I just did not know yet how long I would have to. The years went on the way years do when a marriage is working. Charles and I combined our finances about 6 months in. Not because anyone made us, because it was simpler. My paycheck from the medical office where I worked as a billing manager went into the joint account on the 15th and the 30th. His pension came in at the end of every month. The mortgages on all 3 properties came out of that same account. So did the property tax. So did the insurance. So did every roof patch, every water heater, every contractor who came up the driveway with a clipboard. I want you to understand something. Charles and I did not separate his money from mine. We did not have a mine and a his. We had an ours. He told me that on our second anniversary, sitting on the back porch with a beer he was not supposed to be drinking on his blood pressure medication. He said, "Ellie, what's mine is yours. I don't want you ever wondering." I believed him. I still believe he meant it. He just did not put it in writing the way a lawyer would have wanted. That was the first thing I folded into the envelope in a manner of speaking, the bank statement from March 2002, the very first one, with both of our names printed on the top right corner. I do not know why I kept it. I was not planning anything. I was 44 years old and in love, and the statement had come in a window envelope, and I just slid it into a manila folder in the closet because that is what my mother had taught me to do with paper. Keep it. You never know. The second statement came in April. I put it behind the first one, then May, then June. 22 years later, I had 264 of them, organized by year, in a stack the size of a dictionary, in the bottom of my closet underneath a wool blanket I never used. Nobody knew about that envelope. Not Charles, not my sister, not Daniel, especially not Daniel. Now, here is the part where I have to talk about Daniel honestly, and I will try to be fair, because the dead and the angry both deserve fairness. Daniel was not a monster. He was not cruel in any obvious way. He was the kind of man who used the word practical when he meant selfish, and the word responsible when he meant in charge. He had a wife named Karen and two boys who grew up calling me Miss Eleanor, never Grandma, never even Ellie. That was a choice somebody made early on, and I let it sit because I am not the kind of woman who fights for a name. The first red flag came in 2019, the spring Charles had his first stroke. It was a small one. They called it a TIA, which is the kind of medical word that lets people pretend something did not happen. We spent 4 days in the hospital. I slept in the chair. Daniel came on the second day with a coffee for himself and one of those small bottles of orange juice for his father, not for me. He sat on the side of the bed I usually sat on, and he leaned in and he said, Dad, I just want to make sure things are organized. The properties are still in your name alone, right? I was standing at the window. I had just lifted the blinds because Charles always wanted to know what kind of day it was. I did not turn around. Charles said, Yes, son, they're in my name. And Daniel said, Good, good. That's just clean, that's all. Clean is better. I refilled my tea from the little machine in the corner. The water came out lukewarm because that machine was never hot enough. I drank it anyway. I did not say a word. I did not correct her, I mean him. I did not correct him, not in that room, not with Charles in that bed. But I remember thinking, very calmly, the way you think when the temperature in a room drops 1 degree. He has been waiting to ask that. Charles came home that week. He recovered. We had 4 more years after that, and they were good years mostly. He got a little slower. I got a little louder about his diet. Daniel started coming around more on Sundays, always with a reason, always with a folder of something. Insurance updates, a pamphlet about reverse mortgages he set on the counter and said, Just so you know about it. Things you say to people you are sizing up. I want to tell you about the kitchen table during those Sundays, because that is where most of this story actually happened. Not in courtrooms, not in attorneys' offices. At the table, where I had been pouring coffee for Daniel since he was 23, and he had grown into a man with a softening jaw and a way of looking at the wallpaper instead of at me when I refilled his cup. He would say things like, Dad, you should probably think about simplifying, estate-wise. He would say, Eleanor, this house is a lot for the two of you, isn't it? He would say, Karen and I have been talking, and we just want everything to be smooth when the time comes. He never said when whose time came. He did not have to. Charles was the one with the heart history. I poured the coffee. I cut the pie. I asked about the boys. I let him say what he was going to say, and I let it slide off the table like crumbs. Some people mistake softness for surrender. Daniel did. That was his mistake, and it was a long one. The second stroke came in late February of 2024. It was not small. Charles spent 11 days in the hospital. He came home on a Tuesday in the kind of weather that cannot decide if it is winter or not. He lived for 34 more days. He died on a Sunday morning in our bed with his hand on my forearm and the radio on low because he liked the weather report even when he could not hear it anymore. I want to tell you, because I think it matters, that the last thing he said to me out loud was, Thank you. Not for anything specific, just thank you. I have held that one word for 2 years now. It is mine. Nobody can take that. The funeral was on a Friday. Daniel gave a eulogy. He talked about his father as a builder, a provider, a self-made man. He used the word legacy 4 times. I counted, not because I was angry, but because I was tired, and counting things was easier than listening. He did not mention me. He said, and his family once, which is the way men like Daniel mention women like me, as a category. I wore a black dress I had bought 20 years earlier for a different funeral. I held a tissue I never used. After the service, Karen hugged me at the elbow, the way you hug someone you do not want to actually touch. The boys, now grown, said, Sorry for your loss, Miss Eleanor, like they were reading it off a card. I said, Thank you. I went home. I sat at the kitchen table. The house was quieter than I had ever heard it. I made tea, I let it cool, I did not drink it. The drawer had been locked for a reason. I want to be clear about that. The drawer in our bedroom, the small one in the secretary desk under the window, had a little brass key that lived in a teacup on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet. Charles had locked it for years, and the only thing in it was his father's pocket watch and a folder of old letters from his mother. I did not open it the day he died. I did not open it the day after. I opened it 9 days later on a Thursday because Daniel had stopped by unannounced that morning and asked, "Have you gone through Dad's papers yet?" And the way he asked it made my throat go tight in a way I did not like. I waited until he left. I went upstairs. I got the key from the teacup. I opened the drawer. The pocket watch was there. The folder of letters was there. And there was one more thing, a small white index card in Charles's handwriting that simply said, Ellie, the bank box, First Federal, key in the Bible, page 414. Nothing else. No date, no explanation. I sat on the edge of the bed and I read those words probably 9 times. Page 414. I knew what was on page 414, the Book of Psalms. I keep my Bible on the nightstand. I have had the same one since I was 26 years old. I opened it. There was a small silver key tucked into the binding, a key I had never seen before in my life. The next morning, I drove to First Federal. I had not been there in years. The young woman at the desk asked for identification. I had it. She walked me back to the safe deposit room. The box had both of our names on it. Both. Mine and Charles's. He had added me, she said, looking at the file, in 2014, 10 years before he died. I had not known. Inside the box were copies of the deeds to all 3 properties. There were 2 life insurance policies. There was a handwritten letter from Charles to me that began, Ellie, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry I never told you about this drawer. And there was a single piece of paper, signed and notarized in 2014, that said in plain language that he wanted me to have everything, that the houses had been our houses since the day we married, that he considered me the rightful owner of half of everything we had built, and that he hoped this letter would be enough if anyone ever questioned it. It was not a will. It was not technically a binding legal document. My attorney later told me it was what they call an expression of intent, and that those carry weight in probate, but do not control it. But I sat in that little room at First Federal with that piece of paper in my lap, and I cried for the first time since the funeral, quietly, the way I cry. Charles had known. He had known what kind of man his son was, and he had tried, in his own quiet way, to leave me a flashlight. I drove home. I put everything back in the box except the letter to me. That I took home. I put it in the manila envelope in the bottom of my closet, behind 22 years of bank statements. The second paper told me more than the first, because the second paper meant Charles had seen Daniel coming a decade ago and had not known how to say it out loud. 2 weeks later, the letter from Daniel's attorney arrived. It came on a Tuesday. It was on heavy paper. It was 4 pages long. It said, in the polite, poisonous language those letters use, that Daniel was filing in probate to claim that the 3 properties were premarital assets of his father, that they had never legally been mine, that as his father's only biological heir, he was entitled to the full estate, and that as a gesture of goodwill, he was prepared to offer me a one-time settlement of $180,000 to relinquish all claims and vacate the Birch Lane house within 90 days. $180,000 for 22 years. I set the letter on the kitchen table at the place where Charles used to sit. I made tea. I did not open the letter again that day. I did not open it on Wednesday either. I sat with it on Thursday morning with my coffee, and I read every word slowly. I read it again on Friday. On Saturday, I drove to the cemetery and I sat there for a while and I told Charles about it because that is what I do now. I tell him things at the cemetery. I do not expect an answer. I just like to say them out loud somewhere. On Monday morning, I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia. She had been my attorney for exactly 1 week at that point because Charles's old attorney had died in 2022, and I had not gotten around to replacing him until a friend at church gave me Patricia's card after the funeral. She was 41 years old. She had a firm handshake and a habit of writing notes on yellow legal paper with a fountain pen, which I liked because it meant she was paying attention. I sat across her desk and I told her the whole thing: the marriage, the properties, the joint account, the envelope, Daniel's letter, the watch, the Bible, the bank box, the expression of intent. I talked for 45 minutes. She did not interrupt me once. When I finished, she capped her pen and she said, "Eleanor, may I ask you a personal question?" I said yes. She said, "How many of those bank statements do you have?" I said, "All of them." "Every month. 22 years." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know what transmutation is?" I said, "No." She said, "It's a doctrine in family law that says when two married people treat a premarital asset as a shared asset, over time, with documented behavior, the asset becomes marital property by transformation. It doesn't matter whose name was on the deed first. What matters is how the property was treated during the marriage. If your income was paying that mortgage for 22 years out of a joint account, those properties stopped being his premarital assets a long time ago. They became yours, both of yours. The court won't see it any other way if we present it correctly." I sat there with my hands in my lap. I said, "Daniel doesn't know about the bank statements." Patricia smiled. It was a small smile, the kind of smile a tired woman gives another tired woman. She said, "Then let's not tell him yet." That was the second red flag I had not fully understood until that moment, not the letter. The fact that Daniel had filed without asking. He had filed assuming. He had filed believing that I was a 68-year-old widow with no records, no advocates, no documents, and no ground to stand on. He had filed because he had been watching me pour coffee for 22 years, and he had decided somewhere along the way that softness meant I had nothing. There was also, Patricia found later, a third thing. Daniel had contacted the mortgage servicer in late March, before probate was even filed, before Charles had been gone 4 full weeks, and asked for an account history for estate planning purposes. That request was logged. The mortgage company keeps a record. Patricia subpoenaed it. There it was, in writing. Daniel had been preparing his case in the days right after his father's funeral, while I was still washing the casserole dishes the church ladies had brought over. I want to tell you that finding that out hurt. It did. It hurt the way a slow cut hurts, the kind you do not notice until you see the blood on the counter. But it also did something else. It made me certain. Up to that point, part of me had wondered if I was being unfair to Daniel. Maybe he was grieving badly. Maybe he was scared about money. Maybe Karen was pushing him. The mortgage call killed all of that. He had not been grieving. He had been positioning. The minute his father stopped breathing, Daniel had started counting square footage. Patricia and I worked on the case for 4 months. Slowly, carefully, like two women baking bread together. We pulled every bank statement out of the manila envelope, one by one, and we tabbed the mortgage payments in green and the renovation expenses in blue. We pulled receipts for 31 different contractors going back to 2003. The total in renovations on the three properties came out to $310,000 and change. $310,000 of work paid for out of our joint account into properties Daniel said had nothing to do with me. I kept finding things that surprised me. There was a check from 2007 from my paycheck account before we fully merged it, made out to a roofer for the duplex. $8,400. I had forgotten about that. I had been 49 years old, and I had written that check standing at the kitchen counter on a Wednesday because Charles had been at a doctor's appointment, and the roofer would not start without a deposit. I held that copy of the canceled check in my hand at Patricia's office, and I said, "I did not even remember this." Patricia said, "That's the thing about being the wife who does everything. You forget what you've done. They don't. They just don't write it down." The court date was set for September. By August, Patricia had built a binder thick enough to prop open a door. 264 bank statements. A spreadsheet of every mortgage payment, color-coded by source. The contractor receipts. The mortgage servicer's records, including Daniel's premature March phone call. a copy of Charles's expression of intent from the bank box, photographs of the renovations, dated, with corresponding receipts, and our marriage certificate on top of everything, like a foundation stone. The week before court, something happened that told me Daniel knew he was losing. His attorney filed a motion to withdraw from the case. The official reason was irreconcilable disagreement with client regarding case strategy. Patricia read the filing to me over the phone and she said, "Eleanor, this is what it looks like when an attorney has told a client to settle and the client has refused to listen. He's getting out before the verdict, so he doesn't have his name on it." I sat at the kitchen table with the phone against my ear. I looked at the envelope on the chair beside me, full of years. I said, "So Daniel is going to court without a lawyer?" She said, "He'll find a new one, but it'll be someone who didn't have time to read the file. That's our advantage." I said, "Thank you, Patricia." She said, "Thank yourself, Eleanor. You kept the paper." The morning of court, I put on the navy dress. I did my hair. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before I left, with my hands flat on the wood, and I thought about Charles. I thought about the second anniversary, the porch, the beer he was not supposed to be drinking. What's mine is yours. I don't want you ever wondering. I had not wondered. I had just kept the paper. That is what wives like me do. We keep the paper and we hope we never have to use it. I sat in the second row. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table with a young attorney who looked like he had been hired the week before and had probably not slept. Daniel did not look at me when I came in. He looked at the wood grain on the table. His attorney went first. He spoke for about 15 minutes. He used the phrase premarital assets 11 times. I counted again because counting still helps. He said his father had purchased the properties in 1994, 1996, and 1998, all before the marriage. He said the deeds had remained in his father's name. He said that under the law, those properties were therefore part of his father's separate estate, and that as the only biological child of the decedent, his client was entitled to the entirety of the real estate holdings. He said my name twice. Both times he called me the surviving spouse, not Eleanor, not Mrs. Eleanor, the surviving spouse, like a category. Patricia stood up. She was wearing a charcoal suit with a white shirt. She did not raise her voice. She never raises her voice. She walked to the lectern and she said, "Your Honor, opposing counsel has correctly stated that the properties were purchased prior to the marriage. He has, however, omitted 22 years of subsequent financial history. We would like to introduce that history now." She walked the binder up to the bench. She walked a copy to Daniel's attorney. She walked another copy to the clerk. Then she went, statement by statement, year by year, through 22 years of joint account records. She showed the mortgage payments. She showed my income deposits, which had funded those mortgage payments. She showed the renovation receipts. She showed the contractor invoices. She showed the photograph of the new roof on the duplex from 2007 with the canceled check pinned to it. She did this for almost 2 hours. I want you to understand that I had lived this. Every receipt was a Saturday I remembered. Every mortgage payment was a month of my life. The 2009 statement was the year my mother died, and I had still made the deposit on the 15th, because that is what you do. The 2014 statements were the year Charles had his first heart scare, and I had still kept the renovation on the duplex going because we had a tenant who needed a working furnace. Each of those papers was a day of being a wife, and Daniel had told the court those days had been free. In the middle of Patricia's presentation, she paused. She turned to the judge. She said, "Your Honor, the legal doctrine here is transmutation. When premarital assets are commingled with marital income, serviced by marital funds, maintained by marital labor, and treated by both spouses as shared property over a period of decades, those assets transmute into marital property. The deeds are not the question. The conduct is the question, and the conduct is documented for 264 consecutive months." The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain, looked at the binder. She looked at Daniel. She looked at me. She said, "Mrs. Eleanor, did you keep these statements yourself?" I stood up. My knees were not steady, but my voice was. I said, "Yes, Your Honor, every month since the spring of 2002. She said, "Why?" I said, "Because my mother taught me to keep paper, Your Honor, and because I never wanted to be in a room where someone told me I had not been part of my own marriage. The judge wrote something down on her notepad. She did not look up for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor. You may sit." I sat. Daniel did not turn around. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Patricia called me at home. I was at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee. She said, "Eleanor, the court ruled in our favor. The properties have been declared marital assets by transmutation. You have been awarded the full marital equity, $5,600,000. I said, "Patricia, can you say that one more time?" She said it again. I did not cry. I did not laugh. I sat there with the phone in my right hand and my left hand flat on the wood of the table where Charles used to sit, and I said, "Thank you." And then, because it felt like the only honest thing I could say, I said, "I wish he could have heard it." Patricia said, "He knew, Eleanor. That's why the box was waiting for you." I want to tell you what happened with Daniel because I think you want to know and because I think it matters. He did not call me. Karen did not call me. The boys, who had said sorry for your loss at the funeral, did not call me. About 6 weeks after the ruling, Daniel sent a single email. It was 4 sentences long. He said he was sorry for the way things had played out. He said he hoped we could move past it. He said he understood there were strong feelings on both sides. He said he hoped the boys could still come around at the holidays. I read it twice. I closed my laptop, I made a cup of tea, I let it cool. I did not answer it, not because I am cruel, because there is nothing in me left to say to him. He took my marriage and he tried to feed it to a court like it was a receipt for something I had borrowed. I am not going to have him at my Christmas table so his sons can call me Miss Eleanor and his wife can hug me at the elbow. I am 68 years old. I have run out of pies for people who do not know what I am. I sold the duplex last year. I kept the rental on the highway because Lorraine has lived there for 16 years, and she calls me on my birthday. I still live on Birch Lane. The kitchen is the same, the wallpaper is the same, the chair where Charles used to sit is the same, although I have a small blue cushion on it now because nobody is going to tell me what to put on a chair anymore. The manila envelope is still in the bottom of my closet. I know I should put it in a fireproof box. I will, eventually. For now, it sits where it sat for 22 years under the wool blanket I never used, full of papers nobody believed I would keep. I think about Charles every morning. I think about Daniel almost never anymore. I think there is a difference between forgiveness and forgetting, and I have done one of those and not the other, and I am at peace with the choice. The marriage was real. The years were mine. The houses were ours. The court said so. But more than that, Charles said so, in his own handwriting, in a letter he tucked into a box 10 years before he died, because he had loved me enough to imagine a day he would not be there to defend me. That, in the end, is what I want women my age to hear. If you have given decades of yourself to people who treat your softness as a free service, keep your paper, keep your statements, keep your receipts, keep the small letter your husband writes you, even if he never says out loud what it is for. Keep the canceled check from the roofer in 2007. Keep the date on the back of the photograph. Quiet women are not naive. We are not invisible. We are not what people think we are when they look at our hands and see only the coffee pot. We are the ones who remember. And if stories like this remind you that quiet dignity is not weakness, subscribe to my channel for more stories. Because sometimes the softest voice leaves the deepest mark. I keep the envelope in the closet. I keep the Bible on the nightstand. I keep the chair where Charles used to sit and the blue cushion on it and the morning light that falls across the kitchen table at about 7:15. I keep all of it. 22 years was not nothing. It was a marriage. And in the end, the paper agreed.